There's a moment after a narcissistic relationship ends that completely destroys people emotionally. It's the moment they realize the replacement may have already existed before the relationship even ended. And once that suspicion enters your mind, everything starts replaying differently. The distance, the sudden coldness, the secrecy, the emotional withdrawal, the strange confidence they had while you were falling apart. Suddenly, it all starts making sense. Because what most people don't understand is that narcissists so often prepare emotional exits long before they physically leave. Not always consciously, not always in some calculated movie-like way, but psychologically, many narcissists struggle being emotionally without supply. So while one connection is destabilizing, another one often begins forming quietly. And this realization can feel devastating because now the breakup stops feeling spontaneous. It starts feeling premeditated. And that feeling creates a very specific kind of pain. Not just heartbreak, replacement trauma, because suddenly you feel emotionally exchanged, like someone else was slowly taking your place while you were still trying to save the relationship. And that realization alone can shatter self-worth completely. But here's what most people misunderstand. The narcissist usually wasn't preparing a replacement because the new person was deeply extraordinary. They were preparing emotional continuity because narcissists often fear emotional emptiness intensely, especially during relationship instability. That's why many narcissists begin seeking emotional attention elsewhere before fully ending the current relationship emotionally. Not necessarily because they've completely detached from you, but because they are securing emotional backup, validation, attention, access, stability. Because losing emotional supply creates psychological discomfort that they struggle tolerating. And this next part is what confuses people the most. Because while you were trying harder emotionally, they often seemed calmer, less invested, almost emotionally ahead of the breakup already. And that contrast feels cruel because you were still emotionally fighting for the relationship while they seemed emotionally halfway out the door. But psychologically, that emotional distance often had a purpose. Distance makes transition easier, especially when someone is already redirecting emotional attention elsewhere. That's why many narcissists become increasingly detached right before leaving. Not necessarily because they fully stopped caring, but because emotional investment was already shifting. And once emotional investment shifts, the relationship dynamic changes quickly. That's why their behavior suddenly starts feeling strange, less present, less emotionally responsive, more distracted, more secretive, more irritated by emotional needs they once encouraged. And this is usually where people start blaming themselves. Maybe I became too emotional. Maybe I pushed them away. Maybe I wasn't enough. But here's the truth. Most survivors eventually realize the narcissist often emotionally disconnected before the relationship officially ended. And emotional disconnection changes behavior dramatically, especially when another source of emotional validation already exists. That's why many narcissists leave relationships with shocking speed, because emotionally, the transition started long before the breakup conversation itself. And that realization creates enormous confusion afterward, because now you replay the entire relationship differently. You start noticing moments that didn't make sense before. the increased phone secrecy, the emotional withdrawal, the sudden confidence, the strange emotional calmness during conflict, the way they stop trying to repair things and suddenly the ending feels less accidental, more structured, and that realization creates intense emotional betrayal. Because betrayal isn't only physical, emotional replacement itself can feel deeply traumatic, especially when you are still emotionally committed to repairing the connection. But here's where people get trapped psychologically. They start obsessing over the replacement person, comparing constantly, analyzing constantly, trying to understand what did they have that I didn't. But that question misunderstands the entire dynamic. Because narcissistic replacement usually isn't about finding someone better. It's about finding someone available, someone emotionally responsive, someone capable of restoring validation quickly. Because narcissists often prioritize emotional supply over emotional depth. And that difference changes everything. Because now, their quick transition stops looking like proof of deep love. It starts looking like emotional dependency. And emotionally dependent people struggle tolerating emotional gaps. That's why many narcissists overlap relationships emotionally, not always openly, sometimes subtly, emotionally investing elsewhere, while still technically inside the current relationship. Because emotional overlap reduces emotional withdrawal. And withdrawal is something narcissists often avoid intensely. That's why the replacement phase feels so emotionally brutal for survivors. Because while you're grieving authentically, the narcissist already appears emotionally stabilized again. New attention, new validation, new excitement. And from the outside, it looks like they moved on effortlessly. But appearances inside narcissistic dynamics are often misleading. Because fast emotional replacement doesn't necessarily mean emotional health. In many cases, it reveals emotional avoidance. Because emotionally healthy people usually need time after meaningful relationships, time to process loss, reflect honestly, reconnect internally. But narcissists often move directly toward distraction instead, because distraction suppresses emotional discomfort temporarily, and temporary relief can look very convincing publicly. That's why many narcissists become highly performative after breakups, posting more, showing off more, creating visibility constantly. Because visibility creates emotional impact, especially on former partners still emotionally attached. And this next phase is where survivors usually suffer most, because eventually, the replacement becomes public. Photos, posts, new relationship energy, and suddenly, everything feels unbearable emotionally, because your brain interprets one thing immediately. I was replaceable. Being replaced quickly does not mean you lacked value. It often means the narcissist lacked the ability to emotionally regulate alone. And emotionally dependent people often rush toward new attachment quickly. Not because the connection is automatically profound, but because emotional emptiness feels intolerable. That's why many narcissists seem unable to stay single for long, because relationships often function psychologically as emotional regulation systems for them. Attention stabilizes them, validation stabilizes them, admiration stabilizes them. And when one source disappears, another source becomes urgently important. That's why the replacement often begins before closure exists emotionally. Not because you are meaningless, because emotional continuity matters more to them than emotional processing. And this next realization changes the entire way you see the breakup. Because eventually, you notice something important. The narcissist didn't fully process losing you emotionally. They bypassed the loss through replacement. And bypassed grief is not healed grief. That's why narcissistic patterns repeat so consistently across relationships. Because unresolved emotional patterns don't disappear through new people. They simply restart in new environments. That's why the idealization phase with the replacement often looks intense publicly. At first, everything appears perfect, exciting, passionate, almost unreal. But eventually, the same patterns often resurface again. Control, distance, inconsistency, emotional instability. Because the issue was never one specific partner. The issue was the emotional structure itself. And emotionally unstable structures repeat predictably. But while you're emotionally wounded, that's hard to see clearly. Because pain personalizes everything. You assume if they replaced me this fast, I must not have mattered. But your value is never measured by someone else's inability to emotionally sit alone with themselves. And that realization becomes incredibly important during healing. Because narcissistic replacement often attacks identity directly. Self-worth, desirability, lovability. Everything suddenly feels questioned, especially when the narcissist appears happier publicly afterward. But public happiness doesn't always reflect private emotional health, especially inside narcissistic dynamics. Because narcissists are often deeply invested in appearances. Appearances protect the self-image. Appearances create validation. Appearances maintain control over perception. That's why many narcissists carefully manage how breakups look publicly, especially if they already secured replacement attention beforehand. Because now, they can avoid appearing rejected emotionally. And avoiding rejection becomes psychologically important to them. That's why the transition can feel so cold, so sudden, so emotionally disconnected, because internally, they already created another emotional landing place. And once you understand that, their behavior starts making painful sense. Not less painful, but less confusing. Because now, you stop romanticizing the replacement. You stop imagining some magical connection appeared overnight. You start recognizing emotional dependency patterns instead. And patterns change everything psychologically. Because patterns remove fantasy. Now the replacement stops feeling like proof that someone else was inherently better than you. It starts revealing something deeper. The narcissist's inability to emotionally tolerate emptiness. And emotionally avoidant people often seek replacement before fully processing loss. That's why the relationship ended the way it did. Not with emotional accountability, not with deep reflection, but with transition, redirection, replacement. Because a replacement protected them from emotional withdrawal temporarily. But temporary emotional escape is not healing. And eventually, unresolved patterns always return. That's why awareness matters so much after narcissistic abuse, because awareness interrupts self-blame. Now instead of asking, how could they replace me so easily? You start asking, why did they need someone else emotionally available before fully letting go? That question exposes the entire structure. Because emotionally healthy love doesn't require emotional backup plans constantly. Healthy relationships end painfully sometimes, messily sometimes, but emotionally healthy people usually process grief directly. Narcissists often avoid grief through substitution, and substitution creates the illusion of fast recovery. But illusion is not emotional stability. That's why the replacement phase feels so deceptive. From the outside, it looks like they moved on beautifully. But underneath, the same unresolved emotional dynamics usually continue operating. Different person, same cycle. Different face, same emotional structure. And once you see that clearly, something changes inside you. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's inability to emotionally process loss. You stop interpreting fast replacement as proof you were forgettable. And you stop competing emotionally with the new person entirely. Because now you understand something powerful. The narcissist didn't necessarily replace you because someone else was more meaningful. They replaced emotional access, validation, supply, stability, and because emotional emptiness felt unbearable to sit with alone. And once you understand that, their replacement loses its illusion of emotional superiority. Now you see it differently, not as proof you lacked value, but as proof they couldn't tolerate emotional absence long enough to face themselves honestly.